Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for a review of the 2022 biography by John Meacham, And There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle. So, this is the most recent, I believe, book at this point written by John Meacham. We have already looked at two of Meacham's books on the channel, his work on Andrew Jackson, American Lion, and then his work on Thomas Jefferson as well. And I did reviews of both of those on the channel. And of course, if you watch those, you'll know that my impressions of them were not bad by any means, but ultimately not as over the top enthusiastic as I think I was anticipating given the generally very positive reviews for them. And I did think the Jefferson biography was better. And going into this, I expected that this Lincoln book would probably be better than that. It is the book of Meacham's that is the most well-reviewed on Goodreads and other sites. And the whole kind of premise, the sort of, I guess, approach that Meacham seems to be trying to hit this at is that this is meant to describe Lincoln as a political figure for our times, for the current world, and really promoting the aspects of Lincoln that would appeal the most to modern audiences, namely his role in preserving the Union and his role when it comes to the slavery issue specifically. Now, when I say those words and talk about that perspective, there are probably going to be some people who listen to that and think, okay, that seems kind of obvious that you would want to focus on that, given that is a huge part of Lincoln's legacy, is that uniting the country, feel that piece of it, and then also dealing with the whole slavery issue. And yet, I think it sort of, you maybe notice this a little bit in some of the Lincoln biographies as well, that side of Lincoln sometimes goes underreported by virtue of people thinking, okay, well, everybody knows that piece of Lincoln's story. We don't necessarily need to rehash it. And Meacham seems to be willing to say, no, let's relitigate that a little bit more specifically. And let's kind of talk about Lincoln and how he utilized his power and his platform for those purposes. And so what we're left with is a biography here, and this is a biography. Again, this is another situation where Meacham doesn't advertise this as a biography, kind of like the Jefferson one, but it is. It's a cradle-to-grave biography. And it's one that is going to be, I think, redundant to folks who have already read Lincoln biographies. Like, my impression walking away from this was I don't feel like I personally got that much out of this book, because it rehashes stories that if you've read even a couple of Lincoln biographies, like other ones that I've reviewed on the channel, you'll probably have encountered all of these stories at some point. There's not a whole lot that I think is super, super fresh in that sense. And so from that perspective, I came away from it thinking, well, is this really actually that successful? Does this really stand out from the crowd? But I think it's worth also noting who this is for. This is not written for the crowd that is consisted of Lincoln diehards. Not to say that people who are diehard, followers of Lincoln, people who have researched the history deeply, that's not to say that they are, I guess, underwhelmed by this book necessarily. I think the general perception, the general response has been positive regardless of what their background is. But it's not meant for those folks who are steeped in the knowledge. Like, this is not meant to provide those new insights, I don't think. This is really tailor-made for the beginner. This is a book that understands that, especially in the times that we live in now, where folks are thinking back to days in the past where the United States was incredibly divided. Really, at this point, the only time in our history where we could safely say we were as divided or more divided than we are now. People are going to focus on this history a lot more. And there's, I think, more and more popular books that you see that are really focusing on the seeds of that divide. The Eric Larson book that I reviewed a little while ago. And then the figures who were major players in that divide. and Lincoln certainly is one of them. So this book it contains the strengths of other pieces of the other John Meacham works, in the sense that it is written in a very accessible way, and it is very approachable in how it paces itself. I do think that this succeeds better than the other John Meacham books. Of the three that I've read, this is my favorite. And I think it's because I had problems with how Meacham handled his subject matter in the Jackson book and the Jefferson one to an extent as well. And I think the Jefferson one, which is very much a cradle-to-grave biography, spent a very even amount of time on every aspect of Jefferson's life. And I think the Meacham book here, the Lincoln biography, does a good job of understanding where the important bits are and allocating more time to them. It's still relatively balanced overall. It's not a book just about his presidency. There's a lot of time spent on his early life, and it rehashes again just kind of the same story marks that at this point you become very accustomed to, or certainly I have after reading through all these biographies. But it goes through those pieces, but it makes sure that folks understand that the bulk of the focus should be on the presidency. And while, again, I wouldn't say that it was filled with revelations or anything, it does a good job of centering Lincoln's desire to keep the country united. And it does a good job at citing stories of Lincoln's interactions with different Black folks kind of throughout his life. Not even just the famous stories about like his correspondence with Frederick Douglass, his interactions with Frederick Douglass when he met Douglass at the White House after his second inaugural, that whole story. It talks about that, but it talks about other tales too. And I liked how that played into, I suppose, the epilogue of the book, or kind of the ending after Lincoln's assassination, and how those stories kind of tie into each other. I thought that was a good bit of kind of narrative construction on Meacham's part. And yeah, I don't know. It's a solid one-volume entry as far as Lincoln biographies are concerned. As far as one-volume pieces go, it's rock solid. I don't think it's the best. It's not the most detailed of the one-volume Lincoln biographies. There are others that have higher page counts. This one, again, another Meacham bio that is inflated by bibliography. If you look at a page count standpoint, it's just over 400 pages, the edition that I had, plus like 200, 300 pages of bibliography. But while it's not the best from a detail standpoint, and I would give the edge to David Herbert Donald and Ronald White pretty easily in that regard, what it makes up for, I think, is, again, I do think this is a more fitting, a more stable entry point for the average person than maybe the Donald and the White books are. I think those really still are meant for history enthusiasts, meant for people who are enthusiastic and want to learn more about the subjects. And this really feels like a biography that's built for the common person, that's built for someone who doesn't read biographies on a regular basis to pick up and kind of sink into. And in that sense, I think there's a lot of value in this book, which is why I would recommend it. And if we're going to talk about what are the best entry points for Lincoln for the average person, I do think that this one kind of jumps to the top of the list as far as kind of what I'm thinking about. This is, it covers the whole life, front to back. It covers a lot of the important stories and things like that. With brevity, like it does well at using its 400 pages, but with enough detail to where it doesn't feel like much is glossed over. Maybe some situations you feel like could be expanded on a little bit more, but there are other books that do that. So if you're watching these videos and you have never read an Abraham Lincoln biography and you are looking for one to jump into, while I do have like one more Lincoln biography to review for this channel, the one written by Steve Inskeep from last year or a couple years ago, I don't anticipate that it's going to be a more effective entry point into Lincoln's life than this one. I think this one works very well for what it is. And my only request would be, I do think there's a lot more to sink your teeth into, whether that's the Michael Burlingame stuff, whether that's the David Reynolds, Doris Kearns Goodwin, etc. I think there's a lot more that you can jump into. But I think as a gateway, if you're just looking to kind of see if this is a story you're interested in exploring more, give it a read. It's a good start. Very good, very well written book. Again, my favorite of Meacham so far. And overall, even if I come away from this a little bit lukewarm on Meacham as a biographer, I am intrigued to see what he tackles next. So there you go. With that, I want to say thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks a lot. And I'll see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.